Do resume. All right. Welcome everyone to our Time for Genetics family conversation. We are going to be hearing from two families today about their journeys with genetic testing. So we're just giving everybody just a minute or two to join from the waiting room, and we will get started here. You are in the right place if you are looking for the genetic testing family perspectives call. You've gotten to the right place. I see some of our clinics have joined, so welcome. Thanks for joining. All right, and I think we're going to go ahead and get started just a couple minutes after the hour, and some folks might come and go as we're talking, and that's okay. We are recording today's session so that if you have to jump out to see a patient or get called away for any reason, no worries. We will be recording this and sending this out to the entire Time for Genetics cohort so that you can catch what you missed if you have to step away from the computer. So as I said, welcome to the Time for Genetics Family Perspectives. This is our fourth month in our topic area on genetic testing. And today we are welcoming two families. I'll introduce you to them in just a moment. But I just wanted to start off with our funding statement. The Mountain States Regional Genetics Network grant is funded by HRSA, and this webinar is supported by the Health Resources and Service Administration and their gracious funding. So we want to thank them for that funding. If you have any questions about that funding, you can visit hrsa.gov for more information. My name is Christy Weiss. I'm the projects manager for Mountain States and lead up the Time for Genetics initiative. I think I know most of you on the call, but if there's anything that I can do to help you, please let me know. We also have Michaela Perkins and Jamie Stefanski from Mountain States joining us today. So if you have any technical assistance questions, you can message any of us in the chat and let us know. All right, this is our first call, or first family perspective call for some of our new cohort 2 clinics. So I just put this slide in here just to remind everybody that we do have 18 total clinics now that are participating in the Time for Genetics initiative. Hopefully, if you're calling in from one of those clinics, you see a pin there on the map to represent your clinic. If I don't have it in the right spot, let me know. But the exciting news is we have started recruiting for our third cohort of clinics. This will round out our goal, hopefully, of recruiting 40 clinics in our entire region. That application is open right now. So I just wanted to put a plug in for any of you calling in today or listening to this recording. If you have a colleague in your state, we would love to have them be a part of Time for Genetics, and the application is available on our website, mountainstatesgenetics.org/T4info. All the information's there, the video that explains the program, the application, the sample partnership agreement, that's all available on that page. And we will be accepting applications into January, and that cohort will start, like you all did, in March of next year. So just a plug for applying for the spreading the word about that application if you know any colleagues that would like to join us. And with that, I am excited to introduce you to two family guests we have joining us today. Both of these are remarkable moms and women who are going to share their family's journey with you. We have Amy Holly joining us from Nevada, and you can see her beautiful family there. And we have Jennifer Bana from Montana, who's also joining us. That's a picture of her and her daughter there. And so I'm going to tell you just a little bit about I put this slide in because the reason I chose and reached out to these two individuals to share their story about genetic testing is because they were in two different states, which I thought would give a different state perspective. They have daughters that are two different age ranges, so their journeys differ a little bit in their genetic testing journey. But their daughters are also diagnosed with the same condition called Pitt-Hopkins. And so I asked them when we were preparing for this call how they describe to somebody what Pitt-Hopkins is. And so these are their two quotes there. So Pitt-Hopkins syndrome is new to you. this is how Amy describes it, and Jen describes it to somebody who might not know what that condition is. And I know they're going to share a lot more about their journey to get to this diagnosis with you today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy, because she's going to share with us first her story for about 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to turn it over to Jen to share her story, and then we've allowed some time at the end for questions for both these individuals and some conversations. So that's the gist of our talk today. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see Amy's face there, and I'll let Amy go ahead and get started.
Okay, hello, I'm Amy Hawley. I'm a mother of 5 girls, and we currently live in North Las Vegas, Nevada. So I'll just start with the story of Christy. She's our 4th daughter. I was 32 when I had her. She was born October 8th, 2007. And it was a very normal pregnancy. Being a busy mom, I sometimes didn't feel her move, but I would always lay down on the couch and, wiggle my belly and feel her move and just get back up and get moving on with life. And she was born on her due date. There was nothing that indicated there was anything wrong with her. She passed all of her newborn screening tests, and we went home a few days later. At every well visit, the doctor never mentioned anything. I did notice her eyes were crossed. That was one of the first things. And by 6 months, when they hadn't gotten, didn't fix, because I guess the pediatrician mentioned that it's common for newborns to have the cross eyes, and they usually fix themselves. But since hers didn't, by 6 months, he said he would recommend a eye doctor or somebody for us to go to. And that never happened. And it took me quite some time to find one who would see an infant. And I just finally went to somebody that I had my LASIK through, and they had a guy from Florida visiting. We lived in, I don't know if I mentioned, we lived in Manassas, Virginia at the time, and she was born in Prince William Hospital. And the doctor visiting from Florida specialized in something with the brain and eyesight. I don't know. Anyway, but he was a specialist who saw Christy and felt that there was something more. There was something more to just her being cross-eyed. He said he could easily fix what Christy had with surgery, but he felt there was something more. So he wanted a MRI. And fast forward several months, because it's also hard to get an MRI on an infant, which I did not know that. And we ended up going to DC Children's Hospital there. And that took several months to get an MRI. And it showed that she had hypoplasia of the corpus callosum. That was all we knew. And sadly, we got the news of that before we ever met with any specific doctor that could explain that. So we were looking up information, and we looked up agenesis of the corpus callosum, which is so different from hypoplasia of the corpus callosum. And we just thought our child was not going to live, that she was going to die soon. So that was really kind of traumatic. However, after we met with a bunch of doctors, specialists, we saw pediatric developmental specialists, we saw a neurologist at DC Children's Hospital, and a geneticist. They did basic things. I think at the time, in 2007, there were only genetics was still being discovered. I was very ignorant to all that was involved with genetics, but they kept saying that it's constantly improving, but they only did kind of like your basic snapshot of her DNA and like a little aerial view of her DNA, and nothing was wrong with her DNA. And as far as the brain thing, our neurologist told us that hypoplasia of the corpus callosum is usually caused by something genetic or metabolic. And so far we had no explanation for both. So because of her situation and her developmental delay, we were able to get her right into all sorts of therapy. I was hooked up to that through other parents, other moms that knew other moms. Sadly, it was nothing the pediatrician ever recommended. And I actually fired my pediatrician. He was very unhelpful. We ended up going to a family doctor that my husband and I saw. And he had a child that had some special needs. And so thankfully, we just had somebody rooting for us and helping figure out anything. And so it was really great. But truly, because we knew nothing, it was all just like getting her into therapy. And so fast forward to 2009, we moved to to Las Vegas, and all she is going to school and getting all sorts of therapy. We end up coming across people who set us up to meet our team of doctors that we have here in Las Vegas. So that was great. We really only saw a neurologist. The genetics here, I remember they literally needed me to write a book and collect so much data that as a busy mom with 4 little kids, actually by the time we moved here, I had my 5th girl, and they're all girls, by the way. Not that that means anything, but anyway, so I was a busy mom of 5, my youngest being just a baby when we moved here to Nevada. So to write a book about Christy and gather all this information seems so overwhelming. So we never saw a geneticist actually right away, but we did see a neurologist who had us. She thought she had Angelman syndrome. So she tested Christy for Angelman syndrome, and it was negative. And she just said, like the other neurologist at DC, that genetics is constantly improving and we'll just check back. And then Christy started having some issues. By the time she was 8, we did notice her starting to like hyperventilate and have blue lips. So I had no idea. I just assumed that her lips were blue. She wasn't breathing, but she was wide-eyed and alert. I had no idea what to even call that. And she would do that at the doctor's office as well sometimes. And he would go, "Why is she doing that?" And I said, "I thought you would be able to tell me that." So little by little, she started having seizures. They weren't constant, and she was put on Keppra, and we introduced a neurologist. I mean, not a neurologist. Who's the one for, I got a new neurologist, that's why. And we really only had the neurologist, and he just pretty much said that she's just a little medical mystery. And then it wasn't until 2017, she was almost 10, and she just kept having seizure after seizure after seizure. And in between that time, let me just pause. Right before that situation, we did go to Phoenix to see a geneticist. And that geneticist wanted to do a whole genome sequencing thing. And it was going to cost us, I think, like $9,000. And that was definitely something that was not in our price range. So we just kind of put that on pause. And it was so easy to get into that geneticist in Arizona. I don't know why Nevada is the way it is. It was like nothing to go to Phoenix and get in to see a geneticist there. And so, and we also had a few more tests for like Rett syndrome, Angelman again, because time had passed, and Moet Wilson, and all those came out negative. So then by the time in 2017, when she was almost 10, she had seizure after seizure after seizure. And we got put in, we went to UMC Hospital here in Nevada, and she was put in the pediatric ICU, and mainly also because her hyperventilating, her O2 stats were going into the 20s, but she would hop right back up. So every time we would see her lips go blue, without knowing, her O2 stats were like so low, so low that it freaked them out. They had never really seen that before. And so then they would hop right back up to the hundreds. So she was constantly setting off alarms in the PICU until their team of doctors, one night they came up, they had asked us if Christy loved water, which I think they thought it was Angelman's. So I had known that was something. And I said, she's been tested so many times for Angelman's and Rett's and this, she doesn't have it. And then the doctor came back and said, I think we found it. And I know my husband kind of laughed at her and just said, I'm sure you think you do. Believe me, it's just been a long road for us. But she gave us something, a little list of what Pitt Hopkins was, and she fit every one of them to a T. But we were in tears that somebody, it just felt like this was exactly what she had. And what she said she did was just enter into their doctor database all of Christy's symptoms. Now I know that Christy's symptoms didn't all appear at once, because her basic issue growing up was just developmental delay, maybe some constipation, but she was still like a normal baby, and she just looked different. She had she just had some different features, but she was a beautiful little baby. And so goodness, with that information, all we had to do was get a specific test. So we still have never had a full genome testing done on her. I think what they specifically did was test her for that specific gene for Pitt Hopkins, and she came back positive for that. And then I met all these pretty ladies and got to go to Texas for a specific genetic conference, and got to speak with a really well-known genetic doctor from Colorado, I believe. And my visit with him helped me to know that it's not like so important that I made life crazy for us to go try and get into a genetic doctor here. And now I know, and have a huge group that I'm with. And I don't know, I'll do anything that Christy tells me to do. I will be, when it comes to spreading the word or sharing our story. I do know that you doctors are amazing. I was really mad at y'all at one point, because I just felt like you should know better. It's super easy to, according to that one doctor at the PICU, that you just enter in information and can find it. So, but I also know that you're just that you are a part of this world where you're having to do certain things. And I don't know, to be honest. I'm just assuming or hearing from other doctors that you have this, I listen to Z-Dog. So, I just know that there's certain things that you guys have to do that I'm not aware of. And I just expected a lot more from you than to realize that you're still just human beings trying to do your best. And but now you'll know, with all of us, and hopefully we can all work together. Um, that's about it.
Thank you so
I
much,
think.
Amy. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Amy was one of our consumer scholarship winners that got to come to our genetic conference, and she was recruited by the very special lady that you're going to hear from next, because they were connected through a support group, I believe, right? That's how you all met. And so, Amy, thank you so much for sharing your journey with everybody. I know it's been a long one, but I know through getting a diagnosis, you've been able to get some more support and information to help Christy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen and let her tell you her story. Again, same diagnosis, but a little bit different journey. So Jen, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and I'm going to unspotlight Amy and put you in the spotlight. So give me a second,
Okay.
but go ahead and start talking.
Okay, thanks, Christy. And that's the first time I've heard Amy's story in the total story. So I've heard some little bits and pieces of it, but I haven't heard the whole story. So that was great for me to be able to listen. So as Christy said, I'm Jen Biana and I live in Montana. I have 5 daughters and a son who range in age from 15 to 27. And I have 2 grandsons who are 3 and 1. But it's 2 of my daughters who brought me into this bigger world of genetics. In 1999, our 3rd daughter was born in Montana. About 15 weeks before she was born, we found out through an ultrasound that she had anencephaly. And I normally don't use that word and don't talk about it so freely, but in a room of doctors, I know I don't have to give a lot of explanation about what that means. When she was born, I wanted to know as much as I could about why she had anencephaly and how that had happened. I had no other risk factors. I was taking folic acid. It seemed like I had done all the things that I could do. And so I had wondered if it was something genetic or something else. And I wanted to make sure, since we wanted to have more children. And we'd had numerous ultrasounds. And so I felt like the doctors and I agreed that we had a pretty good grasp on the fact that her organs had all developed properly, that everything looked good, except for the fact that her brain hadn't developed. And so we decided we wanted to do cord blood testing when she was born to run a genetic test. I also didn't want to do an autopsy on her because she was so tiny, and I wanted to be able to keep her with us as long as we could. And so we opted to do the cord blood testing, which actually turned out to be a little bit of a fiasco because the insurance wasn't sure if they wanted to pay for it, depending on whether or not she had died before they took the blood from the cord. And so we did end up winning that battle with the insurance. And we had quite a few battles with insurance. So this was in 1999 that this happened. And so they did the genetic test. I got a call from Sherdare, which is Montana's children's genetic hospital. And they said that, and I don't even know what test, like now I know so much more in retrospect, but I'm not even sure what test they ran, because I was like, run a test and make sure this isn't genetic. And thank you so much. And that was all I asked for. So I don't even know what the test was they ran. But the geneticist called me and said that they didn't find anything on the testing to indicate that the anencephaly was genetic. And I said, are you sure? Because we want to have more kids. And he said, oh yeah, we will probably never see each other again. We'll, goodbye for good, da da da. And so I was like, okay, this is good. So a year later, I had another baby. I was 30 years old, and she was born in Missoula, and she was born a week past her due date. And it's interesting to hear Amy say that her baby didn't move as much. My baby didn't move as much either. And I was a busy mom of 2 toddlers. And so I would lay down, do the moving, she's moving, and then get back up and go about my business. And so when I was a week late, we had some anxiety about that lack of movement, but then the stress tests were fine. Everything was fine. Just didn't move quite as much. And our first few months went along just fine. There wasn't anything at birth that seemed unusual. Breastfeeding went just fine. I was already a little more anxious because I'd had a baby that passed away, and that changes your view on quite a few things. And I have a strong background in assessment and development and early intervention. So I was watching every part of her all the time to make sure that everything was going okay. and I noticed that she didn't have any creases in one of her thumbs. And I became very worried that this might be an indication of something bigger. And so I had a friend who was a doctor, and I'm like, look at this thumb. What do you think? Because there's something going on. He's like, oh, it's probably trigger thumb, and that's an easy fix. You don't need to worry. It doesn't indicate anything else. It's only on the one thumb, and I was like, okay. So that was at about 3 months. At about 4 months, she wasn't rolling over or doing a lot of moving. But when she was born, she weighed 10 pounds. And at 4 months, she weighed 20 pounds. And so I know I can't see your faces right now, but I was like, she's like a little beached whale. No wonder she can't roll over. She's so big. And so, but I was still like, that's a little unusual. So by 6 months, she wasn't reaching for toys. And we had been seeing a family practice doctor, which I thought that was interesting, Amy, in your story when you were talking about that. The way that I usually, I like to have my family all see the same doctor. And so I really enjoyed having that opportunity, and she gave us a referral to occupational therapy. And then I became a little bit more, I wanted to have someone who was seeing more kids see her. One of the reasons was that things would go around like coughs or colds in our population, and the doctors that were seeing more kids would be like, oh, I've seen 3 other kids this week with this. And it was a little harder to do her symptoms. And so I switched to a pediatrician, and we were then doing occupational therapy, speech therapy, and physical therapy. And so we had 3 to 4 therapy appointments every week. And in Montana, we had one pediatric neurologist at that time, and we saw him, and he diagnosed her with hypotonia and static encephalopathy, which, if I understand correctly, like at that time, we kind of joked about it because I'm like, that means she has low muscle tone and something wrong with her brain that won't get worse or better, but we don't know what it is. And I was like, that's like having a diagnosis that's really a mystery diagnosis still, because it was like, yes, that seems to be obvious. So we went ahead and did an MRI, and the MRI came back with nothing much to report on it. We had to have a big discussion with the insurance company about the MRI. They didn't want to do it because it wasn't, her condition didn't indicate that she needed to have it done. But on the flip side, we couldn't get a diagnosis until we had the MRI. And so we did a lot of round and round with them. And we really thought that that would give us an answer. And we still didn't have an answer. We got a referral to genetics around the time she was 2-ish. And when we went, I don't think I really understood that somebody that had seen her, either the pediatrician or someone, felt like maybe what she had was genetic. So, they measured her head and how far apart her eyes were, and looked at her hands and her feet and asked me all these questions. And I told them the answers. And I think the geneticist at that point was suspicious that she had something that was genetic, but I didn't totally get that message for whatever reason, that it was one more specialist, one more appointment, one more person who was going to look at her. And like Amy said, ha ha ha, yes, you will find out what's wrong, I'm sure. And so by that time you're starting to think your child has something she's just different than other kids, but we don't know why. When she was 3, we decided to have surgery on her thumb to fix her trigger thumb. And when they went in to do the surgery, there was no tendon in her thumb. And the hand surgeon did some exploratory surgery around to see if all the other pieces of that thumb were in place and how it looked. And then sealed her back up and came out and said, I wasn't able to fix it. She's completely missing that tendon, but there's another tendon in the hand. We can do a tendon transfer later. It'll be fine. And I was like, okay. So she was, pretty delayed, dealing with constipation. But other than that, pretty much a happy going little girl. And we kept seeing the geneticist like every year. And the first time we went, I got to see the geneticist that had done the genetic test on my first daughter. And I was like, hello, do you remember me? Like 2 years ago, we agreed to never meet again. And here we are. He agreed with me that the two things were probably not connected. We had a little bit of a laugh about it because it was a little bit funny. So we continued to go back every year. I think we had an annual meeting with the geneticist, and they would come to Missoula from Helena, which is a couple hours away, to redo the measuring, redo the stuff, take a picture. And then we had done testing just like Christy had done for Rett's and for Angelman's. And they had finally told me when she was 8, 9-ish that they thought she had atypical Angelman syndrome, or was in the portion at that time. There was about 10% of kids who had, probably they were all kids with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. Now I'm wondering, but that had symptoms of Angelman's. But then when they were tested, they came back as not having Angelman syndrome. And so we had that done a couple of times. And when Hallie was 12, we finally, the geneticist, we had gone through quite a few geneticists by that time, just because Shodair had had a lot of turnover, and that's our children's genetic hospital. And they asked if we could do whole exome sequencing. And of course, I didn't quite know what that was. I know so much more now. Hallie's 22 now, so 10 years later, I know more. And so we were like, yeah, do whatever, tests. By the time she was 12, I was really convinced that she was just born that way, just different than other kids. And we might never know why, and that was going to be okay. So they took blood from me, blood from my husband, and blood from Hallie, and we're getting ready to send it to Ambry lab in California. And at that time, Ambry refused to take Montana Medicaid. And the test was going to be $35,000 to have done. And Hallie had Medicaid, so there wasn't a way for us to figure out how to pay for it. Our state had a fund that they could take some money from to help reimburse some of what Ambry wasn't willing to deal with. But our genetics hospital went to bat for us with Ambry and convinced them that they should take Montana Medicaid and they should take the tests that Shodair was sending them. Now Shodair can do this test here in Montana and it doesn't have to go out. So it took $35,000 in 6 months for us to get that test back in 2012. And I understand now it's more like a couple $1,000s in a couple weeks. So a lot has really changed in 10 years. Like Amy was saying, the doctors, talking about how quick genetics does change. So I went a long time not hearing, 6 months not hearing anything back on the test results. And then in December of 2012, I got a call from the genetic counselor, and she was super excited because they had an answer for me. And so she's like, oh my gosh, I have exciting news. We know what your daughter has. Her diagnosis is Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, da, 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 da. And I actually, and I feel like it's a pretty sure, I actually had a response of feeling very angry. And some people might say that's because it was this big emotional thing and I was really sad, but some of it felt like a phone call of someone saying, your child has a disability and she still has a disability and we know what it's called. And I asked for the diagnosis, but when I received it, I still, the idea that she had something we didn't know what was fine with me. But then that finding out actually was hard for me for a little while. And I think some of it was just that reminder, some of that grief of the reminder of this is permanent. And just like Amy, when I read about the different things about kids with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, I was like, oh yeah, this completely describes and fits all these things about her. Hallie has never had the breathing episodes and the seizures, which I think now very much in a baby or somebody young who's having those things, that would be a pretty good red flag for doctors who are trying to figure out, especially geneticists who are trying to figure out what's going on, because that separates those from Angelman's and some of these other diagnoses that appear like that. Finding this other group of people with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, like Amy was saying, especially on Facebook, was really fabulous. Our families on Facebook have actually been able to do some pretty good scientific research. And in fact, my daughter's thumb is actually something that other kids with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome have. We're not clear about why, but when parents, we started saying to each other, does your child do this? And we would send pictures and we would do all these things. And so I had the opportunity to travel to an international conference to talk to international researchers about what families had noticed, because they were taking information from medical charts and stuff. And they were saying, is there anything else that families have noticed that we should take a look at? And so we were saying things like eyes, thumbs, and all kinds of things that weren't even on their list. And the thumbs is just this weird thing that some of the kids with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome have, and some of them don't. Some have both thumbs, and we're not sure why. So that's actually been sort of a fun, there's things like the Pitt sit, which is how the kids with Pitt-Hopkins sit. And it's like a crisscross applesauce where your feet are like next to your hips. And almost all the kids universally sit like that. So that's been a really good support. Families are an exceptional support for one another. And we work exceptionally hard to become experts on what's going on with our kids, and we're able to help each other do that. And in fact, in Montana, there are 3 children with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. So there's 2 that live in my community and 1 that lives a couple hours away. And our genetics hospital help us get connected. So one piece that, even though it's not so much about genetics, that I would like to leave with you is that families can be such an important support to one another. And even for me, meeting those families, but having the geneticist be willing to say to them, hey, would you like to talk to another family in a similar situation? And then sharing my information with them so that they could get a hold of me. Now the three of us, we feel kind of special. And like the eye doctor in Montana sees all three of those kids. And I'm like, you can go to a conference and be like, I'm the Montana expert on Pitt Hopkins and eyes. And so that is something that I think is really important for families. Hallie's 22 now, and it seems like it was a long time ago, but they were diagnosed almost at the same age, Amy. I mean, different years, but almost at the same age. So I'm always thankful to share my story and think back to those times. So thank you, Christy, for giving me the opportunity to talk about that today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen, for sharing your story. One thing that Jen didn't say when she was introducing herself or talking is Jen serves as our genetic navigator for Montana. So if anyone on the call is from Montana, want to make that introduction and connection, but also let everybody else know that's on the call that we have genetic navigators in all of our states that can help do exactly what Jen was talking about, was to connect with other families and give them some of that support. So thank you both for sharing your stories so much. I know these are intimate and we hold these stories close to our hearts. So being in a situation where we're opening that up and sharing that with other people can sometimes make us feel a little vulnerable, but you guys did it with grace and wonderful way to share. And so I want to pause for a second because it looks like quite a few people have joined us as they were sharing. And I want to pause and ask those who have attended today, who are here right now, if you all have any questions that you'd like to pose to Amy or Jen about their stories, about specific parts of their stories, or anything like that. Jen is still here. She just messaged me that she's having a little bit of connection issues, but she can hear us. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I would just ask, this is a really informal call. So you can unmute your line, you can type it in the chat, and I can read it to them, whatever works best. But for our Time for Genetics participants that are attending today, do you all have any questions for Jen or Amy that you would like to ask them? As you're thinking, I'm going to ask them each one and see if they wouldn't mind responding. Since we have a group of primary care providers with us today, and this is who this Family Conversations is intended to reach, what advice, if you had one piece of advice for individuals that are seeing children in a medical setting on a day in, day out basis, and maybe suspect or have ordered some genetic testing that comes back for Pitt Hopkins, what would be your piece of advice for a medical provider as to something they could do to help that family on their journey? I think you've alluded to some of it, but maybe kind of in a succinct tip.
I'm not quite sure what I would say to them, other than I've had a few conversations when doctors, and they're like, "Ooh, I'm going to look into that. I've heard of it." And so I just direct them like where things are. But I don't know. I think most of us are pretty smart enough to like go and find the groups ourselves, but I wish that they would know. I wish that my pediatrician could have just typed in his database more often, like any little thing. I didn't know that. I probably could have done that too. I wouldn't have known that her wide bridge or her ears being melded or these little tabs on her fingers meant anything, right? And all those little things that meant she didn't move. Like I just didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. So I'm not going back and like making myself feel guilty or shoulda, woulda, coulda. But my one pediatrician, especially when I moved here, was pretty good about bragging about how awesome he was. So I just felt like he proved me wrong. He proved himself wrong, kind of.
So I think you bring up a good point, Amy, in that when you get into the rare world, right? It's almost a whole different skill set, right? It's not stuffy noses and ear infections. It's a whole different ball game. So looking, I just posted while you guys were talking, the rare disease information site for NIH, which has a lot of information about hundreds of thousands of rare diseases. And so I put that as a resource. So sometimes just knowing some resources to look at, right? If a provider suspects something is going on that maybe is rare.
Yeah, I would have never suspected. Well, I guess when they wanted to check her for that. So then you're like going, oh, what is that? And looking it up, because they know they're testing her for it. And then you're going, she doesn't do that. That doesn't fit. And it's just interesting. But like Jen said, not every kid has all these symptoms right away. So it wasn't until she was like maybe 8 or 10 or 9. And then obviously by 10, she had enough. And now she's like 15 and almost 15. And she's just doing great.
That's the best news of the day.
Yeah.
That's the best news of the day. How about
I
you,
was
Jen?
thinking,
Go
yeah, I
ahead.
was thinking while Amy was talking. So I was really surprised to find out that doctors don't actually have training on like rare disease and special needs and kids with disabilities. And I think a lot of families assume that we assume that you guys have been trained on everything all the time and you have lots of answers. I mean, like Amy was saying, she went into it like that, right? And I think for me, one of the most helpful things was having my doctor listen to me and trust me. So if I said, I think my daughter would benefit from occupational therapy, having my doctor say, well, let's send her to the occupational therapist and see what they say. Like trusting that if I took my child to an occupational therapist and they didn't think they needed occupational therapy, they would send me away rather than saying, oh, I don't think she needs that. If a parent is really insistent, and I know that it can be difficult with some types of medical tests and things that can be covered and not covered and the indications and stuff. But a lot of parents, I believe, are really going with their gut and what they feel like they know or what they feel like might be wrong. And so it's interesting because Amanda has a question in the chat about, what verbiage to use when talking to parents. And I was just thinking about that in connection with this. And I think the verbiage is, we don't know, but I'm going to help you find out. Or we don't know, but I'm willing to work on it with you. Because it's funny, it almost makes me cry because I think feeling alone is the worst part, and being confused and working so hard and going to therapies. And so I think saying I'm here and I will do everything that I can do, or let's work together on this, would have been really one of the best things for me to hear. Like, I'm going to be here and we're going to figure it out.
I agree with Jen.
Thank you for sharing that. I got a little teary-eyed too, because I felt that on my journey with my own daughter as well. And even I would add to the verbiage, even saying, and even if we don't find a genetic answer, I'm still here to support you. So I think that's the tough part about genetics is that there's not a guaranteed answer for all families. Go ahead. Somebody was speaking on the phone. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, it's Dr. Pence from San Luis Valley. So I'm a general pediatrician in rural southern Colorado. And I was going to chime in and just, kind of say what you had already said. So you did an amazing job, but you're right. Patients have these really high expectations of us and of what our knowledge is. But then, like you also said, specifically in the arena of genetics, like it's changing so fast, and every year there's so much more that we learn. It truly is its own specialty. But like you just said, and I have, so I'm a general pediatrician, but I also have a niece who had a rare genetic disorder, and she passed away almost 2 years ago now, at the age of 16. But she traveled this similar path to you guys. And so I've seen that from a firsthand experience as well. And like you said, just being able to have somebody there for you to say, we don't know, and we may not know if we run this test, but we're going to stick together and let's look at your kiddo now and figure out what we need. What can we do to help them right now? So I wanted to echo and thank you for everything that you said. I just appreciate you sharing it with all of us, and giving us providers, giving us doctors some grace as we try to walk the path with you.
Thank you,
I
Dr.
had
Pence. Go ahead,
I
Jen.
had one other thought, Christy, which is that sometimes when you have a child with a disability, everything is something that you're trying to achieve and work on, and your child never gets to it. So once you learn to roll over, now you have to do this, and now you have to do that. So I think another way that pediatricians can support families who have kids with disabilities or whatever is to comment on those things that the child is doing well, or that is an improvement from the last time, even if it's eye contact, or even if it's like, so smiley with me today, or those little tiny things. I don't know if you know how much a parent will puff up when they walk out of the room and they can call their husband and be like, our 2-year-old was so smiley with the doctor today, which seems like such a little tiny thing. But often with all the therapies and appointments, it's just this constant mill of more data, more things to do. And sometimes we forget to look at the little person and be like, this is a fabulous little person who has gained these skills or is now doing this, even if it's just this tiny eye contact or hand squeeze. I mean, I puff up super big when somebody notices something that's fabulous about my child, because they don't get comments the same way other kids do about those milestones and learning those things. So I think that's another like really tiny way that you can support families that will just make them feel super proud.
Ooh, I'm gonna ditto that, because our pediatrician gives the kids high fives. Like, Christy is handsy. I don't know about is it Hallie, right? But Christy, she knows how to literally hit on people. So um our pediatrician is really cool about that, and always directs his talk to her, instead of like, can you move her shirt back, or can you do this? He like talks to her like I think she definitely understands. So I love that. And because I fired a neurologist who literally treated us like we had some cootie or something, wouldn't really address her and stuff. So that's a very important thing.
Thanks for sharing that, Amy. And I want to just read these comments in the chat, because I feel like our Time for Genetics program has attracted some really caring providers who are in this because they really do want to help families. So Jose says, I'm so happy to be here today, talking about you and your children's stories. I agree, further complex care and genetic metabolic disease training is something that general pediatricians and family practitioners would benefit from. Sadly, this continues being a problem. Thank you all for your advocacy and search for answers. So I know Mountain States is trying to do something very small to bridge that gap with this Time for Genetics program. So thank you so much for those comments, Jose. And then eBerry comments, I went into pediatric medicine because I was a parent of a child who had multiple birth defects and issues and ended up passing away at 5 months old. And we never did find out what was wrong with him. But I was most frustrated because my doctors wouldn't listen to me when I said something was wrong. So when I started my practice, I swore I would always listen to my parents, because they are with the baby 24/7 and I am with them 30 minutes. I think you should stand up for your child and never back down. It brings tears to my eyes. Thank you so much for our practitioners' comments and thoughts. And we have about 10 minutes left. Were there anybody else that wanted to unmute their line to ask any specific questions about Pitt-Hopkins? I'm curious if anybody on the call as providers has a child in their practice that they've ever seen with Pitt-Hopkins. I'm just curious from that perspective too. Anyone ever seen a child in their practice, or maybe after hearing some of the signs and symptoms, do you suspect maybe there's a child you want to go back and revisit that you're seeing? Jose says no, I have not in his practice. Oh, I see somebody unmuted. Is that you, Dr. Pence?
It's Dr. Pence again. No, I don't have a child or one that I suspect with that syndrome. But I was thinking more about the time, right, that patients need from us as providers. And as these two wonderful ladies alluded to, the challenges that we're faced with as providers due to the healthcare system that we're trying to function in. Right, all the check boxes and the timelines that we're trying to meet. But like you suggested, people kind of branching off and creating these specialty clinics for these kids. I mean, these kids and these families, they just need that. They need that extra time. They can't, they deserve to not be run through the mill, with the growth and development check in their shots and they're out the door. They need more and they deserve more. So I just hope that our healthcare system, with groups like this and providers out there, like myself, that are passionate about this group of patients, can kind of change that model for the better.
Great point. And I know when I did some work with the medical home initiative, that one of the pieces of advice to help families advocate for that time was to, when they scheduled their appointments, right, to schedule not just the 15-minute well check or sick visit, right, to ask for more time, to ask for a longer, more extensive visit. And oftentimes those will be covered by insurance if they're scheduled and coded correctly on the insurance side. So great point. Even those double appointments, probably not enough time, but great models are coming out like your practice, Dr. Pence, that you're setting up, that is focusing just on special needs families and being able to give them more time. I know sometimes that doesn't lend well to the insurance model, private or public. So that's a real challenge there. But I know there's some ways for families to advocate on their end and you all to advocate on yours to get them a little bit more time, and both parties get reimbursed for the efforts. And I have a comment here that says, I have seen it once in Dallas when I was working at a children's hospital in my residency. Is that, Dr. Berry, did you want to comment on that? Specifically what you saw?
Yeah, so it was kind of like the story that the other ladies had said. It was one of those kiddos who had been there for a while and they had worked on and trying to diagnose and couldn't diagnose. And they had had all the different types of specialists and everything in it was a little girl and she was there she was about to leave. So they'd finally just diagnosed her right when I got there. So I didn't get to spend much time with her, but I did go through her record and everything. And it was quite interesting to see how much that poor child went through, how many different doctors test and everything before they finally did get the diagnosis. And like I'd commented on the other, having my child and going through all the tests. So I totally get it as a parent. It's hard. It's not that you want something wrong, but you want an answer. And so I think as far as that child goes, they were doing well. And once they kind of got everything and got them in the right place, was doing much better. And then they had moved because they just came down to Dallas for the diagnosis and everything. They were actually from the Valley in South Texas near the border. So it was a little Hispanic baby.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm guessing when you said I've seen it once, you mean Pitt Hopkins, right? A diagnosis
Right.
of Pitt Hopkins
Yes.
syndrome. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, we have a couple threads of conversation going on at the same time. So no problem. Thanks for sharing that story with us. All right. Anyone else? If not, I'm going to just give a couple of reminders before we wrap up today. Is there anyone else that had a question, comment, thought? I just want to thank Amy and Jen again for their time today. We did a prep call before this, and so they've invested some time preparing for today, and I really appreciate you all, your time today sharing, and the fact that you're letting us record this so that those who weren't able to make it live here today can listen to the recording and catch up on your stories. So I'll just pause for one moment. Anyone else wanted to speak before I give just a couple of reminders to our cohort clinics? All right, with that, I'm just going to remind our cohorts, we are actually wrapping up our topic area on genetic testing. So if you remember back, we had a newsletter in April. We had that great webinar by Dr. Scott on genetic testing. It's not rocket science. If you haven't seen that, that's archived. That was in May. In in June, you should have received something in the mail from me. So if anyone on the call did not receive a package, a manila envelope in the mail from me with a laminated guide on genetic testing, let me know and I'll make sure after the call to verify your address. And then this month was our family conversation. So those four aspects will repeat starting again in August. We are going to kick it off with autism as our next topic area. So we will be looking for a newsletter in August. In September, we just scheduled our webinar for September. So I'll be sending you a link to register for that. about autism and genetics. And again, in October, you'll get a mailer from me. And then in November, we'll have families come together again like this who have experience with genetic testing, or sorry, genetics and autism. And we'll have another conversation like this. Because we are wrapping up our topic area, it is the point in the process where I will ask you for zip code data here in the next couple weeks. And that is just zip codes of any patients that you've used any of these resources, knowledge, information about over the last 4 months, so April to the end of July. And then I'll also be sending you a link to just a qualitative survey, just a couple questions to answer qualitatively that will probably be due towards the end of August. Be looking in that survey though, because I put together a question to add to that, because we have not determined our next topic area after autism. And we would like you all to weigh in on some of the suggestions that were presented at our summer meeting. And so I've made a list of all the suggestions that have come through, and we'd like you to rank those as far as your interest level in our next round, which will start in December. So be looking for all of that. And again, please join me in thanking Jen and Amy and giving them our gratitude for their time today. Thank you all so much. And thank you to all our clinicians for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedules as well. Hope everybody has a great rest of the year, July. Talk to you soon.